Hello and welcome to Tilly Money Video. This is the second video we've done in the series, and the point of these videos is to try and explain things, sometimes what are considered technical terms, in a much easier way. And the term that I'm going to explain this morning, I'm glad that I'm explaining it now and not 3 to 6 months ago, because what I want to do over the course of this video is to give you an understanding of what is a recession. Now, I speak economic lingo because I studied economics in the University of New South Wales, so I understand what's meant by a J-curve, diminishing marginal returns, recession and depression. It's common everyday speech now to understand the language, but the fact that a lot of people don't actually know what a recession is, you know what? I see that as a really good thing because it means they haven't been through one. Nowadays, of course, with the 6 months from January to June, because of the global pandemic, most people have an inkling of what a recession is because they've actually lived through one. So to get very technical in that definition, let me first explain what economists define as a recession. Now, it's seen as 6 months or 2 quarters of negative economic growth. And the quarter from January to March this year, it was a tick down because the real impact of the pandemic, the coronavirus, COVID-19, call it what you will, really hit in March. So growth was only down a tick in the March quarter. In the next quarter, from April to June, it dropped 7%. That's a massive drop. So technically, we were in a recession. The first quarter March, the second quarter June, both came in with negatives. Now, growth, what does that mean? Well, when economists work out the statistics of what actually is a recession, they look at a thing called GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. They're all the things that we produce in an economy in a year. Now, that could be things like services, massages, hiring a bike to go for a ride in the park. It could be groceries. It also looks at other things like rent. It throws all of those into a basket, and it's called gross domestic production. And if that drops, first quarter down, second quarter down again, that's when you say you're in a recession. The good news, though, is that in the September quarter, all the data is pointing to the fact that we're out of recession. So we're getting positive news coming through. So what that means is the recession is over. It's over now if that data is correct, but technically until we get that data released, we're still in one. Now, you might say, how many recessions have we had? There's been lots of them. I'm living proof that you live through them and it doesn't majorly impact on your life. I'm not trying to make light of recession because we all know in this major recession that we've had due to COVID, people have lost their jobs. People may have lost their businesses. That's tough, and that's very, very typical of what goes on in a recession. But a recession is a long way from a depression. Begs the question, what's a depression? Well, economists don't really have any one definition for that. Some say it's continuing rolling recessions. So you might have 6 months of negative growth, as we have now. You might get the next quarter, there might be an uplift in growth, and then we go on to another 6 months. And if that just keeps on rolling on, technically you might call that a depression. But we haven't had a depression globally since the 1930s. And most people in Australia, we've been lucky enough to get away with a recession until right now. And sure, there have been ones. There was one in the 1960s, it was through a credit squeeze. There was another one in the early 80s, but again, only 6 months. And a lot of people just would have sailed on in life, and if you didn't lose your job and your business wasn't affected, you probably wouldn't have even realised, unless you read negative headlines in the media, that there was actually a recession going on. Of course, there was a recession in the early 90s. There was a massive stock market collapse in 1987, and that flowed on in Australia to what we call the recession we had to have. That was a term coined by the then Treasurer, Paul Keating, and it's been used over and over again, the recession we had to have. That affected a lot of people. It was a pretty serious one. And then everybody thought that there was going to be a big recession at the turn of the century because there was what's called an Asian economic crisis. We weren't affected. Why? Because China was fueling our growth. as the Chinese economy was opening up. Goods and services were being produced at massive amounts. They were requiring our raw materials, and China fueled our growth. So we sailed along right up until the current pandemic-induced recession, all of that 20 years without even being affected. There was a global financial crisis around the year 2008. That didn't get us either because, again, we were fueled by China. So while the rest of the world was suffering, and sure, in some sectors there were difficulties in Australia, but we did not register a recession technically until this year because of COVID and the impact that that's had on all of our lives and all of our businesses. So recessions are not good things, but they do check when growth is going wildly. Sometimes recession just check out of control growth. And as long as you have kept your job, as long as your business is still thriving, and as long as we can have a positive attitude and get out and spend, and that's why the government introduced JobKeeper and Job Seeker, because governments intervene to try and smooth out downturns in the economy. You see, way back in 1939, seems a long time ago, you didn't have the kind of government interference that you do now. And one of the key roles of government is that when they see a downturn happening, to stop it getting too serious, they come out and spend. We were lucky that this government was fortified with reserves, so they had money to spend, and they quickly put that into action. They put money in the hands of people to go into shops and buy goods and services, which kept people in jobs, kept businesses' doors open, and kept things moving. And that's a great thing about what governments can do to make sure that the dips in economic cycles, they're not too sharp on the upswing, but they don't go too low as well. So there you have it, in a nutshell, that's a recession. And let's look at more growth, more stable growth throughout 2021. Thanks for listening to the explanation about a recession. Let's hope we don't have to define that too often. Next time, we'll decipher another technical term.